I've been a cab driver for nearly 2 decades, and I've seen all sorts of things on the road. Nothing really rattles me anymore, or so I thought, until that night. It was a day like any other, when I got a booking to take a family from my town to a remote village, about 150 kilometers away. The road was winding, with potholes big enough to swallow a tire, and at points it seemed to disappear into dusty, narrow tracks. By the time we reached the village, the sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the distant hills. The family thanked me, paid their fare, and invited me to share some tea before I began the long journey back. I figured a quick break wouldn't hurt, so I agreed. It was around 7:30 p.m. by the time I left, the sky now darkening as I started the journey back. I traveled that route plenty of times, so I wasn't too concerned, even though it was a lonely stretch through thick forests. The mist settled in thickly as I went deeper into the woods, swirling around the car, cutting visibility down to a few feet ahead. My headlights were the only source of light on that dark road, illuminating patches of trees and fog. About an hour and a half into the drive, I had the radio on low volume, the faint music barely breaking the silence. That's when I heard it, a distinct click and creak. My heart skipped a beat. It sounded like the rear left door had just opened. I felt the car shake slightly, as if someone had climbed in. And then, just as quickly, I heard the door close. I looked in the rearview mirror, but there was no one there. I must be imagining things, I told myself, shaking it off. But something felt off. My instincts were tingling in a way they hadn't before, but I kept driving. A few minutes later, I thought a smoke might calm my nerves, so I reached for my pack and struck a match to light my cigarette. Just as I brought the flame close, a sudden gust blew it out. Now, I was sure I had closed all the windows, and there was no reason for a draft. Annoyed, I lit a second match. This time, the flame died out even faster, like someone had blown on it deliberately. I felt a chill creep up my spine. One last time, I tried lighting the match. The flame flickered weakly and then went out again, this time accompanied by a stronger rush of cold air from directly behind me. It was like someone was sitting right there, behind me, breathing heavily. My skin prickled, and I felt every hair on my neck stand on end. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I froze. In the dim reflection, I saw her, a silhouette in the back seat, right behind me. She had long, wavy hair covering her face, her figure shadowy yet distinct. I couldn't move. For a few seconds, I sat there, gripping the wheel, my eyes locked on the mirror. The woman didn't move, she just sat there, silent and still. It took everything in me to slam on the brakes, my tires screeching against the empty road as I skidded to a stop. My heart pounded, and before I knew it, I was out of the car, stumbling onto the road and leaving everything behind. I ran, the mist swallowing me whole, but I didn't care. I needed to get away from that car. Luck was on my side. I spotted a small village just a few minutes down the road. I staggered to the closest house and banged on the door. When a man opened it, I must have looked like a madman, babbling about what I'd seen. They brought me inside, offered me some water, and tried to calm me down. After hearing me out, the man nodded grimly. He told me that travelers passing through those woods at night often reported strange things. Car doors opening and closing by themselves, shadows in the mirrors, and some had even claimed to see a woman standing on the side of the road, sometimes vanishing right before their eyes. The family allowed me to stay the night, and though I tried, sleep wouldn't come. I kept picturing that figure in my back seat, her face hidden, her presence heavy. When morning finally came, I thanked the family who accompanied me back to my car. As I drove home in the daylight, I promised myself I'd never again take that route alone after dark. To this day, every time I pass through that stretch of road, I feel her there, lurking in the shadows. And every time, I press the pedal just a little harder, leaving her presence behind. At least, I hope so. My name is Loom, and I'm 30 years old now. But there's something that happened to me when I was just a kid, something that I've never been able to shake. 16 years have passed, and I still feel like it happened just yesterday. The memory of that forest, the voices that called my name, still echo in my mind. I grew up in a remote village nestled deep in the hills of Meghalaya. Back then, there were no roads for cars, no concrete trails. The only way in and out of our village was by foot, on narrow paths that cut through thick forests. The forest was our life and our livelihood. We would collect wood, forage for herbs, and hunt. It was also a place everyone respected and feared. One autumn day, my father and I went into the forest to gather wood, just like we always did. I was around 13 or 14 then, old enough to help out, or so I thought. My father pointed to a dense part of the forest and said he'd be off to another area to find fresh wood. "Stay here," he told me. "Gather what you can, but be careful. Watch your back." His words were stern. Then, as I was stretching out for another branch, I heard it, the faint, unmistakable sound of a baby crying. The wail came from somewhere deep in the forest, echoing off the trees. It startled me at first, but I brushed it off. Maybe a family from the village was passing through with a child. I focused back on the branches. But then, the crying got closer, sharper. It was strange. There were no paths here, no reason for anyone to be out this far. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination. But the crying continued, rising in pitch, until it sounded like it was coming from right beneath the tree I was on. I glanced down, expecting to see something or someone, but there was nothing. Just the ground, the fallen leaves, and the shadow of the tree stretching out. The baby's wailing persisted, now so close that I felt it would drive me mad. And then all at once, the crying stopped. There was silence, but then I heard something else, a voice calling my name. "Loom, Loom." The voice drifted up from the base of the tree, soft at first, but unmistakable. It sounded just like my father, the same tone, the same way he would call me. But something about it was wrong, like it was off pitch, echoing strangely. I froze, my whole body tense, waiting for it to speak again. "Long," the voice repeated, almost pleading. And as it kept calling, the tone started to change. It became softer, lighter, turning into a woman's voice. My heart hammered in my chest. I knew then, whatever was calling me was not my father. They always told us never to respond to strange voices in the forest, and now I understood why. The voice continued calling, desperate, luring, until suddenly it faded into silence. The forest was quiet again, but I felt a deep, chilling cold settle around me, as if something was watching, waiting. I don't know how long I stayed up there, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Then, finally, I heard footsteps. Real, solid footsteps crunching through the leaves. I looked down and saw my father emerging from the trees, looking up at me with a concerned expression. "Loom, what are you doing up there?" he asked. I scrambled down, my hands shaking, and told him everything. The baby crying, the voice calling my name, the way it changed to a woman's voice. He listened carefully, his face growing pale. He put a hand on my shoulder. "It's a good thing you didn't answer, Loom," he said quietly. Then he explained. There were stories about that forest, old tales told by the elders. They said there was a spirit in those woods, an entity that mimicked the voices of loved ones to lure people deeper into the trees. Some never came back. Those who did often fell gravely ill or met misfortune shortly after. We gathered the wood quickly and left. I could feel the weight of the forest pressing in on us as we walked, the silence heavier than before, like it was watching us leave. That night, I lay awake, hearing the voice in my head, the way it had tried to pull me down from that tree. 16 years later, I still remember that day. I can still hear that voice calling my name in the silence. And they say the entity still haunts that forest, waiting, calling to anyone who dares venture too deep alone.